So the Crown Prosecution Service is going to start applying an unconscious bias test to make sure people aren't, make sure people are anti-racist. This is after, apparently, research suggests black suspects are more likely to be charged than white ones. And so prosecutors are to apply new rules when charging suspects as part of a drive to eliminate unconscious racial bias. Guidelines will be introduced. And the CPS said the new code for Crown prosecutors would seek to eliminate racial bias in decision-making and tackle high levels of disproportionality in the justice system. Now, I have done a little bit of research onto this. I wrote an article about it, in fact, just last week. And this is following on from some research that's been conducted in America by Rutgers University and the Network for Contagion Research Institute. And first of all, let's give some context. In the UK, we have twice as many people employed into DEI roles, as they're called, diversity, equity and inclusion, than any other country. Twice as many, costing us $500 million a year. So we lead the way, really, more than America per capita when it comes to people who want to give this sort of training. Now, they have assessed people who have gone through unconscious bias training. And what they did is they got people to go through the training and then got other people who didn't go through the training. Then they laid in front of people test cases where they had to then react to particular scenarios and judgments to see whether or not the unconscious bias training had had an actual effect in, the way they made up their minds and the way they emotionally reacted to certain situations. In all cases, unconscious bias training increased bias. It increased a desire to punish perceived perpetrators. And those predisposed already to left-wing politics had an especially heightened appetite for punishment. The study revealed a significant increase after people had DEI training. They'd had the unconscious bias training. Those people were more likely to agree with some of the words used by Hitler. They put Hitler's words in front of these people. Now, leading psychologists, top psychologists, Jonathan Haidt and Steven Pinker, have both warned against unconscious bias training, saying it can lead to coercive control, intolerance, punitive habits, and can result in echoing the psychological dynamics of past authoritarian movements. So that's my view on unconscious bias training. Let's get the view of Nusrit Mehtab, who's a former police superintendent. Nusrit, it's great to have you on the programme.
Thank you, Alex.
The Crown Prosecution Service are going to be putting this unconscious bias training in place. I don't like it. I think it's wacky. I think it could be potentially dangerous. I think that we don't need our faculties tested and bent and changed and manipulated in order to make sound judgments. But I could be wrong on this. They're saying that research suggests black suspects are more likely to be charged than white ones. What do you think?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of facets to what you've said and some of the facts and figures you've given. But let's address why the Crown Prosecution have done this. And this is evidence-based, as you've said. They did comprehensive research program of their own work. They found there was a disproportionality. We're not talking small disproportionality, we're talking big. And then they hired Leeds University to do the research. They looked at 195,000 cases. They found that there was disparity in the way that white suspects, white British, as they classified, and mixed ethnicity suspects were treated. Now, if for comparable crimes, and this is it here, for comparable crimes, they found that if you were from a mixed ethnicity, black or any other group, you were either 77% more likely or 83% more likely to be charged compared to a white Brit who was 77% more likely, to be charged for the same crime. They then went to a different university. They went to Ashton University, and they wanted to know what the causes of this were. They worked with independent scrutiny board. They worked with legal professionals, all races, all ages and groups, and they worked with members of the community. And what they found was that in the actual charges that the police officers and the prosecutors were doing, and they looked at a sample of over 400 like-for-like cases, and they found, although they didn't find overt racism, they found that in terms of the language used in writing the reports and the word count was different. The negativity that was put onto black defendants, if you like, or black people that had committed the same crime as their white counterpart was negative, and it unnecessarily focused on violence, and that led to a different mindset. Now, they put an action plan together, and what you've described as diversity training, and there is learning and training and digital tools to be used for their staff, but there are other measures that they've put in, which is that they're going to review their codes of conduct, codes of practice for the Crown Prosecution Service, and try to eliminate a bias from those codes to make them anti-racist. They haven't quite said how they're going to do that, but that's one of the things that they're going to do. And so I'd like to know how they're going to measure that.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem here, isn't it? The big problem is how, because so much of unconscious bias training, frankly, and this is the report that I read by the network and Rutgers University, basically said that, the problem with so much unconscious bias training is it kind of ends up watering down to almost being anti-white training, that they look back on things like white supremacy, white privilege, and it ends up getting people quite angry, but in the opposite direction. And then the wish to punish people for supposedly exhibiting this unconscious bias gets extremely high. I mean, at some point we need to acknowledge that, we're human, all too human.
I tell you, I've been on, unconscious bias training. I've been on it, and I've got biases, but they're different. And I don't believe that they focus on, certainly the training that I did, that they focused on white supremacy and other things. This is quite about the individual themselves, to make them think about their own, how they think, their attitudes and behaviours. So I don't know what training that you're talking about there, or where that was delivered. I don't know. But here's the thing, Alex. What are they supposed to do if you've got two comparable cases, like for like, but one individual is white, and we'll use those terms, and one individual is black, but the outcome will be different? Surely they have to take some action to realise what's gone on in order to get rid of that disparity. If you and I committed the same crime, and we both, it's like for like, but you were going to be treated differently and I was going to be treated more harshly, surely we need to address that. And one of the other things that they've done, the Crown Prosecution Service, so they've taken a plan of action and they've come up with 4 different measures. And one of them is that they're going to be working with the National Police Chiefs Council to set up a racial disparity group, and where they both, in that group will be represented legal professionals, police officers, all the different aspects, community advisory groups, to challenge and check each other. I think that's a very positive. I do share your views on about, unconscious bias training, how that's delivered, how do we measure it, and what it actually contains. And I think those are the things that I would like to see from this. This hasn't happened yet because they're in the middle of reviewing it. But once it has, I'd like to see the results before, and I would like to see the results after. So no one group is disadvantaged or has more of a disparity in the criminal justice system, because what it impacts on is it has a massive impact on people's lives, and we've got to get it right for everybody that goes through the criminal justice system.
It seems to me that the law by itself should be entirely colour blind. The law looks at a series of facts, and based upon those facts and evidence, it makes assessments. Russell?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not sure how you can train the unconscious. It just seems an oxymoron, really, a paradox to me. Can I just suggest there's a different way of looking at this? And I think the analysis here, the assumptions within the analysis, I think are very, very dangerous. We have spent months and months and months talking about two-tier policing. The fact that we know it is a matter of fact that different ethnicities get treated in different ways, right? We know that as fact based on the summer unrest. Could it just be, there's a different way of looking at this, that if you are more likely to be falsely and inappropriately arrested as a white person, as a consequence you have less chance of being charged. So there is a different way of cutting this analysis. So in other words, Alison Pearson, as a really, really good example, gets, although Alison wasn't arrested as such, she was spoken to by the police. If there's more of a propensity to tackle and chastise and arrest white people and less of a propensity because of alarmism around being seen as an institutionally racist organisation, as we know that many police organisations are worried about, then it means that ethnic minorities are less likely to be arrested in the first place. So therefore, if there is culpability, they are more likely to be charged because less of them, proportionally, are arrested in the first place. It's just a matter of statistics. So you can cut it the way of this being biased, or you can cut it a different way, which is it may well be that the police are arresting people based on ethnicity in a disproportionate way in the first place.